Welcome back, Honors. All right, so you guys did so well in class today, right? We went into different fields of science. We discussed Sir Francis Bacon and the creation of the scientific method. We reviewed our scientific thinkers that were all about their heliocentric versus geocentric orbit patterns. We discussed the ideas of Descartes, I think, therefore I am, do we exist or not, how can we prove that, etc., etc., etc. And again, really quick, I do believe that all of you exist. It's just a thought experiment. It's just a fun little thing to kind of ponder and wonder. It's not a really big deal. But the big thing, though, going forward is also we are discussing how that's going to expand into medicine, right? We talked about Andreas Vesalius a little bit. We discussed how the use of autopsies and creating this new idea of peeling back the skin of a human to see the muscle attachments and all these other amazing things are going to give way to this guy creating a new medical textbook, right? His medical textbook was actually discussed or called De Humani Corporis Fabrica, which literally means on the fabric of human beings, right? And it was actually issued around 1543. So it was actually issued right around when Copernicus was getting involved. And we talked about all of its drawings and everything. We talked about its examination of the human form and how it was kind of the renaissance of medicine. One of the coolest things I find about it, though, is the very, very first copy of De Humani Corporis Fabrica that was ever published by Andreas Vesalius, since the printing process is not the expensive part, but the binding of a book is very expensive because you have to pay for the leather and the materials that actually go into making it. The very first copies of De Humani Corporis Fabrica were actually bound in human skin. He had a lot of extra human skin lying around because he had been peeling it off bodies and stuff, so he used it to bind his books in, which I think is phenomenally interesting. Now, so we just talked about him, we discussed, we got into a couple other things, but the big thing we're moving forward now, and where we left off in class. I don't have a class.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
So also, you'll love that. I don't know if y'all just heard that, but I'll make sure to turn it up. Miss Beth just called for my absentee, and I don't even have class. Now, anyway, so we talked about him, and then we got into what the heck this thing is, right? So this is another branch of like general sciences that's going to expand during this time period, but that right there, my friends, you won't believe me when I tell you, but that right there is the very first microscope, right? That is the very first microscope designed by a Dutch scientist by the name of Anton van Leeuwenhoek, right? So, and it actually is a pretty simple apparatus. You hold the slide or the specimen right there. There's a little hole right here to look through, and then actually you look in to the specimen and you kind of try to see or grapple with what's on the other side of it, right? You try to see, can you see deeper into everything? What can I see? What am I looking at here? Da 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 da. And apparently Anton van Leeuwenhoek was the very first person to see small organisms in pond water using his microscope, right? And actually that little hole right there, you would hold it all the way up to your eye. That little paddle like right there, you'd hold it all the way up to your eye, and then you could actually look through it. Now, he's gonna he's gonna perfect like what you would call the first microscope, and he's gonna view cells and microorganisms and things like that. Now, another guy that you learn about in your science textbooks by the name of Robert Hooke is an English scientist who's going to come along, and he is actually going to use the microscope that he creates using Galileo's refractory lens technology to actually see even further and more enhanced images than Leeuwenhoek ever did. But there is a big argument over who invented the very first microscope. We believe Leeuwenhoek's came first due to its more primitive nature, and then also just because some of his writings surfaced earlier actually talking about his mechanism, this microscope that he created. And Robert Hooke is going to actually view cork cells very first. But a really, really cool thing about Robert Hooke's design is it looks a lot like what you believe a microscope of the modern era to look like, right? And also, he's going to be a phenomenal artist with his as well. He's actually going to draw a lot of the things that he sees, and this is one of the very first anatomical drawings of a flea that he actually saw underneath his microscope, right? There are several other ones. He actually diagrammed or drew the images of a fly eye, that you can actually see the hexagonal pattern on the eye of the fly, and he saw several other different things, but like I said as well, he also saw cork cells, which is a very, very important piece that he actually saw under his microscope, right? Now, even though there were two different ones, it's still important to understand that they came during this scientific revolution, right? Now we're going to have a guy that is going to be the titan of the sciences, who actually worked with Robert Hooke himself, right? Robert Hooke, the guy who invented the more advanced microscope, worked alongside of this man, right? And his name is Sir Isaac Newton, all right? Sir Isaac Newton. Why do I have a picture like this up instead of his actual picture? Mainly because it's just a funny little Schoolhouse Rock video ad. But check this out. I got you. Sir Isaac Newton, all right? And we are not going to have words on the screen to discuss Newton. We're just going to briefly talk about him, and I want you to write a couple of the things down that I say, the things of significance, and I'll tell you what to write down. So that right there, That's Isaac, okay? First of all, Sir Isaac Newton was born in England, okay? He was born to a moderately wealthy family and had shown a brilliant interest in science and mathematics from a very young age, right? We believe that he is probably a certified genius. He is very, very intelligent. He worked at Oxford where he was a student, and then he also took some professorships at Oxford as well, and he ends up becoming the president of the Royal Academy of Sciences. Now, interestingly enough, though, early on in his career, it was actually met with kind of a lot of flops, right? The very, very first book that he ever published was actually called The History of Fishes, and actually it didn't go very well. He ended up dying with more copies than he ever sold, right? Now, he was also hyper-religious, right? Very, 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 very religious. He believed one of his biggest jobs was to try and figure out the day the world would end, okay? So Isaac Newton's kind of a quirky character. Never got married. Actually, never got married. We believe he died just with like zero interest in marrying a woman or anyone for that matter. And he was also kind of a huge jerk, right? Robert Hooke, the guy that we talked about 2 seconds ago, he actually had a hunchback, right? And a very, very famous quote about Isaac Newton, apparently attributed to Isaac Newton, that apparently he said was that the only reason that I can see so far is because I have stood on the shoulders of giants. Might have been a backhanded slap in the face at Robert Hooke because he had a hunchback and he was short, right? Now, Isaac Newton, though, his career is going to truly start when he writes a book called the following, right? This is where he really, really got off to a big start, On Optics, right? So On Optics is going to be the text written by Isaac Newton that is actually going to discuss, okay, On Optics, Isaac Newton. There we go. Here we go. Science, optics, and you. So on optics, okay, his first idea was that white light is actually the combination of all colors of light, right? And he is going to be the very first one to use a prism to actually separate those the white light spectrum into different shades and different colors, right? And in that moment, he discovers the 6 human perceptible primary, base, and secondary colors that we can actually use to see in the color spectrum of the human eye, right? And he actually separates all of them, right? And they asked him, they were like, oh, in your On Optics book, what were the different colors that you saw? And he said, oh, I saw these colors. I saw red, and orange, and yellow, and blue, and violet, and Roy G, B, V, right? These are the colors that he claims that he saw, right? Now, some of you are like, Mr. Terry, you're missing one right here. I'm not there yet, okay? So let's go ahead and take him out, okay? And if you notice, it's the primary colors of red, yellow, and blue, and every one in the middle of them is the combination from the outside colors. Yellow and blue go together to make green, red and yellow go together to make orange, red and blue go together to make violet, right? So actually looking at this is the color spectrum that he saw coming out of the opposite side of that prism. And so he's theorizing what light is, how it works, how it moves, what it does, right? And he says that actually this creates white light because it's the combination of all light. He then begins to theorize the ideas of light reflecting back to the human eye, being able to how you perceive color. And then one day he got really freaked out. And he said, oh no, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 colors? 6 is the color of the devil. And so he adds indigo to his setup so he can have 7, which is a holy number by comparison to 6, right? So that I find to be extremely interesting, all right? So, but On Optics is going to set the tone for his career, right? And he's going to start rolling forward, and he has some other successful works, he begins to theorize some different ideas, but here's the most important one. In his book, known as the Principia, which is his seminal work, right? It looks like this, Principia, okay? He theorizes Principia. There we go. Principia. There we go. The Principia. There it is. Principia Mathematica. He theorizes the idea of universal gravitation, right? So what Isaac Newton does is he comes along with the concept of universal gravitation. That's where the old story comes from. The apple falls off the tree, hits him in the head, and then he's like, oh, gravity must be the thing that pulled that down. I must find out the mathematical force and the mathematical understanding of the relation of the size of an object to the actual falling object itself. And so he begins to theorize these ideas. Fun fact, apple never fell, hit him in the head. We believe that when he was trying to escape 2 events that occurred in London, because in 1665 there was the Great Fire of London, and then in 1666 there was the plague outbreak of London, and so he had to move out to his family's estate that had an apple orchard on it. And more than likely, he just used the apple falling off the tree because he saw a lot of apple trees and he needed to use this as an example to explain to stupid people, right? So he then figures out, though, using calculus, primitive calculus, to figure out the relation of the size of the Earth to its gravitational pull, which is the thing that keeps us on its surface. He also uses this to prove the understanding of the planets that go around the sun and how they continue their progression because of the forces of gravity and a frictionless space, right? He then also theorizes laws on motion and the conservation of energy in the Principia as well. There, for every action, there is an equal but opposite reaction, right? So the big things you need for Isaac Newton are his on optics work, Principia, which is going to be his law of universal gravitation, and then just jot down as well, he has laws of force and laws of motion, or laws of force and motion, and then also law of conservation of energy. You're learning all that stuff in your science class as well. But Isaac Newton is going to basically use all those concepts to unite all the branches of science together under one key core idea, using conservation of energy, conservation of matter, and then also the universal gravitational pull. Now, he did struggle with this as life went forward. Also, fun fact, he invented calculus. You're welcome. Now, the big thing about him, though, he also struggled with this in later life because a lot of people were like, dude, you just kind of like took God out of the movement of the stars and the movement of the bodies. And he was like, no, he fixes them and stuff. And like he got kind of freaked out and stuff. But he ended up dying. He's actually buried in Westminster Abbey, right? So very, very interesting little stuff about Isaac Newton. But Isaac is the man, all right? So I think he's a very interesting figure. But now we're changing gears, okay? So if you want, really quick, I'll throw these ideas up, okay? You ready? I will make a little list real fast. So on your quiz tomorrow, you're going to need to know the following guys. Aristotle, Copernicus, Brahe, Kepler, Galileo. Then you're going to need to know Bacon, Francis Bacon, René Descartes. That's I think, therefore I am. Also, fun fact, you know René Descartes invented the graphs that you use in geometry and algebra, the x and the y-axis. That is called a Cartesian plane. Apparently, he was looking up in his bed one night. He was looking at the roof. He was probably pondering existence or whatever. And a fly was like, zzz, and it like landed on his roof, and he looked at it, and then it got up and flew around again and landed over there, and it got up and flew around again and ran over there. He's like, if I drew a bunch of lines right there, I could jot down and plot where that fly actually went, and that's how he ends up inventing the graph and the Cartesian plane, right? So he actually invented Cartesian geometry. Now, you're welcome for geometry. So you need to know Descartes, okay? So let's do those again. You need to know Aristotle, Copernicus, Kepler, Brahe, Galileo, Descartes, Bacon, and then you need to know Vesalius. You need to know Leeuwenhoek, Robert Hooke, and then Isaac Newton, okay? Those 11, okay? You need to know those 11 guys for tomorrow's quiz. Because I don't want to have to put all those on your test because it'll just bog the whole thing down. Because now we're moving into absolutism in Europe, okay? So we're changing gears completely, right? We're going all the way back to the 1500s now, right? We just progressed forward. Just to give you an idea, the Principia Mathematica was actually going to be issued in the late 1600s. We're jumping all the way back now to the 1500s again, because now, as we know, the renaissance of the sciences was going on at the same time that this was occurring as well, okay? So now we're talking about the political renaissance that's going to be occurring, but it's not a good renaissance, it's a bad renaissance, okay? We're now moving into the absolutist era in Europe, right? Some of the other kids are going to be like, oh no, this is going to be hard. I got a lot of kids that are going to be really excited about it because it's crazy stories about all these crazy individuals, right? We're going to talk about Louis XIV. We're going to talk about the Stuarts. We're going to talk about a lot of these people, okay? Now, the absolutist era, though, very, very important that you understand. Let's go ahead and throw an example or a definition out for absolutism, right? Absolutism is the complete control of a government and its people under one monarch, right? That is an absolute government system. That one monarch has complete and total authority. If, hypothetically speaking, Colleen O'Connor was the absolutist of 523 during the hours of whenever D period arrives to class, y'all would basically have to refer to her in every single facet. And if she said, you know what, Mr. Terry, I don't like your outfit today, off with his head. Like, and I would definitely just be put to death, right? Like, it's all about her, and she is the person that controls the entire country or the entire room and the going-ons within it. Now, that's not to say that they don't have, like, a bureaucracy underneath them and stuff like that, but I'm just saying that that's the concept that we're dealing with here, okay? So we're moving into the absolutist era, right? And why? Like, why now? Why is the 1600s, early 1600s, late 1500s, going to be the bedrock of the absolutism era? What was the point? Why is it happening now? Why did it not happen earlier? A lot of historians point to the fact that the trends of the Reformation and exploration are going to be the biggest reasons why this occurs, right? Mainly due to the fact that before absolutism occurred, you want to jot this down, there were three groups of people in power, right? In the Middle Ages, you had the church, the nobles, and the monarchs, right? Okay, church, nobles, monarchs. Now, in the early Middle Ages, your nobles were the most powerful people because they could communicate directly with serfs, workers, vassals, and the people that lived on their lands to stay safe from barbarian invasion, and they were the ones that held the most power, right? So the only way you could fight a war in the early Middle Ages was by assembling an army of the people that lived on noble lands, right? Then next is going to be the Catholic Church, right? The Catholic Church ends up getting a lot of power. The Pope ends up claiming papal supremacy during the late Middle Ages and the High Middle Ages. And then as time progresses forward, though, because of the Renaissance, the Reformation, and the Exploration, the monarchs are now growing their power, and they are now the ones that are completely in charge, right? So, and a lot of historians point to the Reformation and the Exploration periods as being the big indicators of why, okay? The Reformation, because wars are starting to be fought between Catholics and Protestants. This is going to strip a lot of church power away, and which is going to leave room for strong and powerful leaders, okay? So, big thing about it we'll get into here in a minute. It's called a power vacuum, but we'll discuss that in a moment, okay? So, wars are going to be fought between Catholics and Protestants, and since that's happening ever since 1517, when this guy, Martin Luther, posted 95 Theses on the door of that church, but even though he actually never did that, big thing about him with that, that's going to create room for the monarchical power to grow. If they choose to go Protestant, they won't have to answer to the Pope. If they choose to stay Catholic, the Pope may reward them with more ability, the ability to appoint bishops and clergymen or something like that. So the Reformation is causing more power to go to the kings, right? And the Exploration period is the big one because monarchs are now making more money, okay? They are gaining money from exploration and seeing a huge increase in their wealth, right? Before the Exploration period, monarchs did not have nearly the amount of funds to be able to control as much as they possibly could. They didn't have the infrastructure, they didn't have armies, they didn't have a lot of different stuff, right? But the big thing that's going to give them that money is the Exploration period, because as of 1492, Columbus has now discovered two brand new continents. Well, he didn't discover squat. Like the Spanish have now discovered two brand new continents that are going to provide a ridiculous amount of money to the Spanish, giving more power to those monarchs we talked about. Isabella and Ferdinand Castile. This trend is going to continue to carry forward, and the English monarchs are going to grow in power, the French monarchs are going to grow in power, and then everybody else's monarchs are going to grow in power as well, okay? So, really quick though, there we go. Now, feudalism also is beginning to die. Oh, wait, actually don't jot that down yet, not yet. So these two things, Reformation and Exploration, since it's now limited the power of the church, and since it's now limited the power of the nobles, that has created what's known as a power vacuum. Do me a favor, jot that down. Not a power vacuum as in the Dyson that you have at your house. I mean a power vacuum in the terms of a vacuum of governmental authority, okay? So since there is no one around as much telling people who's in charge, this is what you have to do, this is your life, here are your taxes, blah, 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 blah. With that absence of power, because a vacuum is an absence of something, the royals are going to enter into that power vacuum and establish themselves as supreme leaders, okay? So that's a power vacuum. Since nobles and the church lost so much power due to exploration, the Reformation, and also the Renaissance, the royals are going to enter into that vacuum and lift their power up, okay? So that's a power vacuum that was created during these two periods. Not to mention the fact, too, that feudalism is beginning to die, all right? So feudalism is dying out because capitalist systems that have been created since the era of exploration are now beginning to replace them, right? Nobles are realizing that they can't stand to make as much money anymore by just taxing certain, like, villages or landowners or things like that. So feudalism is beginning to die off. Since it's declining during the Renaissance, kings are going to centralize their power away from the lords and away from the nobles, and a big thing that they're going to do is they're going to begin to raise their own armies, right? Why did the kings for the longest time need the nobles around? Because they wanted to ever raise an army, they had to call the nobles and say, send me your vassals, and then they would go out to fight another country, okay? But now, kings are focusing instead on creating professional militaries, long-standing militaries with uniforms, basic issue guns, basic issue rations, all these other new ideas, right? Where these people get paid for being inside of that military. They're going to create this professional military, and army sizes are going to triple during the reign of the absolutists, right? So that's a big thing an absolutist needs, is a professional army, okay? So since feudalism's dying, what do? You replace that with a professional army. Also, another crazy thing that's happening that's pushing these absolutist power forward is these religious wars that are breaking out all over the place. Since religion is playing such a major part in the outbreak of power, absolute authority, and things like that, Catholics and Protestants are beginning to fight against each other, okay? Now, one of the biggest wars that I need you to jot down really quick was the 30 Years' War, okay? The 30 Years' War, which ranged from 1618 to 1648, is going to be one of the cataclysmic wars that gives a ridiculous amount of power to people like Louis XIV, to people like the Hohenzollerns in Prussia, to the people like, who else? Who else is going to get a lot of power? Actually, there's the big ones, all right? So the frequent wars are going to make the nobles in the Catholic Church very, very weak, which is something we talked about earlier as well. This is a very, very famous event that we'll talk about later, the St. Bartholomew's Day Massacre, which is indicative of all that religious war, okay? And then also, Machiavelli. How did Machiavelli contribute to the ideas of the absolute power and the growth of these thoughts and theories? Well, mainly because Machiavelli during the Renaissance had romanticized the idea of absolutists as being above the law, right? He had romanticized the idea of a strong, powerful, confident leader that was able to do harm to other nations while protecting his people, right? That he was feared yet loved at the same time. So people, because of his thoughts, begin to crave this idea of a strong, benevolent leader that will lead us into promise and lead us all into economic gain and glory, right? So Machiavelli is a big thing. All these things gain together to give kings massive power and wealth. So you've got exploration, reformation, religious warfare, professional armies growing, feudalism dying out, and then also, not to mention the fact that Machiavelli's ideas from the Renaissance are giving kings more and more power, okay? That's huge. That's absolutely important to understand that the late 1500s, the early 1600s are the time, the era, the place where kings are growing their power at an excessive rate, okay? Look at Henry VIII is a good example. Look at Henry VIII. He has created a brand new church because of the Reformation, growing his own power, right? Look at the Castiles. They sent Columbus. He finds new stuff. They start growing their power. Now, they're more early 1500s, but it's okay, all right? Now, big things important to understand as well is that you got to know how to spot an absolutist when you see one, right? So, how do you know an absolutist is an absolutist, not a constitutional monarch, right? Well, jot this down, okay? These are the traits of an absolutist. Now, I think you should go B, C, D. The way you should write this in your notes is big A for absolutist, and then underneath it you got B, C, D, right? And then that way you can keep it organized and you remember, okay, A for absolutist, B for this, C for that, D for that. That's my ABCDs of my absolutist, right? So, really quick, every absolutist has a bureaucracy, right? Every absolutist, to be able to rule efficiently, has to create a system where they have intendants, like they do in France, where they have nobles who work for them, where they have certain authorities that go out and collect tax money. That's their bureaucracy. We talked all about that in Egypt when we discussed them. They need to have a centralized government, which means they have a government that is ruled from one place, a capital city or a prime location like Versailles inside of France, right? And then the last one, which is the most important one, is the king must be invoking this idea of divine right rulership, okay? Kings during this era believed confidently that they were the preeminent and non-understated power that ruled over their country because God gave them that power. This right here is a picture of a divine right monarch. The idea is that their religious system that they chose, whether it be Protestant or Catholicism, is the thing that gave them that power. Much more active in Catholic countries, by the way. But divine right rulership is another element of absolutism, okay? And the big absolutist countries that we're going to discuss in this time period are going to be Spain, France, Russia, and England, sort of. All right, they're going to have some people that are going to try to become absolutists, but they're going to fail miserably. So we're going to stop right there. I will see you guys later. Y'all have a good one.